Well, hello, I'm Chris Brogan, and I can't even begin to tell you how thrilled and befuddled that I was able to land Nancy Duarte to spend some time with us and talk about design and everything like that. Besides being a conquistador and head of Duarte Design, Nancy wrote a couple of books that you may or may not already know that are just amazing. Slideology was the one that really kicked my butt, and then this one really resonated with me as well. And Nancy, welcome. And what's your third book called? Your new one in the pile?
I think my third book's going to be around delivery because presentations are a three-legged stool. You got content and slides and delivery, but got a couple of them in the mix there.
Oh, yeah. So you're like me in that you just can't do one thing at a time and you decide to make a lot of projects. Yeah, good thinking.
Yeah. And it's because I'm not busy enough.
Right. Well, given there's enough hours in a day, you can sleep sometimes, I guess. We thought we'd talk a little bit about the presentation process and all the way around. We had done some really good brainstorming back and forth on some ideas about that, starting with what's broken and working our way through some recipes for people, and then even some things that people should stop doing tomorrow. So hopefully everyone will find that some useful information. I guess in giving a start, why don't we talk a little bit about what's broken? You talked to me a little bit about the difference between document versus story. And I think if anything anyone takes away from this presentation, if they only watched the first 5 or so minutes and left with this one nugget, I think that solves a lot of people's issue right then and there, is the whole document versus story thing.
Right. What happens to us right now is we use the same tool to create our documents as we do our presentations. And we shouldn't require our employees to run out and learn InDesign to create their documents. It's fine that they use tools like PowerPoint or Keynote. PowerPoint? PowerPoint. PowerPoint or Keynote to create their documents. But the problem is we create this weird middle ground where it's not really a document, it's not really a visual aid, it's this like middle thing. And so what we try to encourage people to do is if you're creating a document, call it a document and distribute it like a document. So have your the people who receive it read it or PDF it and send it off to them. But have it have things that a book has. Have it have an index. Have it have like a cookie trail or a way to navigate so you always know where you're at. You can even have an appendix, but make it more book-like in layout and structure. And then your slides, your visual aids, can be more dramatic, more dynamic, and more like a mnemonic device for the audience to use.
When people look into that, for example, you tend to see in old-fashioned presentations, it's here I am, it's about me, and I'm going to go from about me into what I'm going to talk about, and here's my 7 things. And so many people have been told that. Here's who I am, here's what I'm going to talk about it, and then get out of there. But there's no movie in the world that works that way. There's no story that says, by the way, the butler did it. Here's how it happened. Except for maybe Memento. So, I mean, what's your
Memento.
Talk through that?
It is interesting. I don't know why people start off. They think that it's going to give them credibility to put their credentials out there. We've got this many locations. We're in this many countries. We have this many sales offices. And it's really starting off talking all about the presenter. And I think because it takes so long to prepare, sometimes we get self-obsessed and we think about ourselves a lot while we're preparing our material instead of spending time thinking about the audience. And we need to break that mindset. And when I was doing tons of research for Resonate, I came across the hero archetypes, the hero and mentor archetypes. And I thought, okay, the presenter is the hero because they're on the stage, they're talking, they're all lit up, and they're talking the most. And a lot of times the hero in a movie is, on the stage the most. And I realized pretty quickly that that's not who the speaker is. The speaker's not the hero. It's really the audience that's the hero. Because if we put an idea out there and our audience completely rejects it, our audience is dead. I mean, not our audience is dead, our idea is dead, and we might as well not even put it out there. So we need to change our stance from the hero to one of the mentor. Like in myths and movies, we're not Luke Skywalker. In reality, we're Yoda. I have a little visual aid for you here, Chris. Got me some little ears for you. So what happens in myths and movie is the mentor actually comes alongside the hero. Want to see my Yoda ears?
I very much, with all my heart.
See? There you go.
Wow, Yoda you are.
I am. Yoda I am, but they're on backwards. But that's okay. Because in myths and movies, what a mentor does is they come alongside the hero and they bring a magical gift, a special tool, or they help the hero get unstuck. And that's our role as a presenter now. And we just have to change our mindset because in reality, that's what a presentation is supposed to do for us. And it's not very often you sit through a presentation and you leave feeling you got a magical gift or a special tool or got unstuck. But if you build your presentation the right way, that's how your audience will feel. They'll feel like they just spent an hour with Yoda. And that's what's supposed to happen.
So that's pretty interesting. I'm a bit of a Batman guy myself, and I was thinking that in taking that further, I mean, when I come out of a Batman movie, I'm Batman. I've got to drive fast. I've got to crash through billboards or whatever he's doing, and that puts the presenter in sort of the Alfred thing. The Alfred who's giving the good advice to Batman, who then has to go off and translate that into crime fighting or whatever. So. Any quick, easy tips? And I didn't push you too on this ahead of time, but any quick, easy tips on the difference in language to make somebody feel more like, to get them into the mentor mindset? I mean, I assume there's a lot of second person you involved, but how do you tell people to kind of make it more mentor than hero?
I think that one of the things about a mentor, like Yoda was 5,000 years old, and he'd been around the journey of heroes several times before, and that's what gives him so much credibility and wisdom. So I feel like what you have to do is spend some time thinking about your audience, your hero, and think about the journey that they're on. Think about what a day in their life looks like. How much money do they make? How do they spend their money? Where do they hang out in life and on the web? And I research, man. Before I'll talk to an audience, I'll go and look at the Twitter feed. I'll look at what they talk about. I'll research a company. I'll really try to figure out what they're doing. And then that gives you a different kind of a position with them, one of, I'm here to help you, I know you. Because when you're persuading your friends, it's easy. Persuading strangers is much harder. And so if your heart already warms when you think about them because you know them, right there, that's a change in stance towards them.
We're going to go on and talk a little bit about the creative process, but I just had one more thought. When I talked about the you element of things, I notice sometimes when people speak on stage, they use the plural. It's sort of a you, people of Earth, and you guys, and all that. And I've learned something from Tony Kahn, who was a public radio professional for 30 years or so. And Tony said that whenever he gives his recordings, one of the things that makes him sound better than a lot of the other people maybe doing radio was that he always does it as if he's looking directly at one person, and he's telling this one loved person this very useful information. And when I blog or whatever, I try to write to one person. I try never to say you guys or whatever. Do you translate it that way as well on presentations of that kind?
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people just approach it, well, it's just a big glob of people. And it's not. You should pretend that you're having a conversation with a long line of individuals that are waiting to have a personal conversation with you. And there's a great tip by Nick Morgan. I don't know if you know Dr. Nick Morgan.
I do.
Amazing. In his Trust Me book, he gave what I thought was the greatest tip. He said, before you walk on stage, think of someone you love but you have not seen in a really long time. And when I was reading the book, I could actually physically feel my posture change, my stance change. And they said, when you walk out, pretend you're going to see that person. I think one of the reasons we get so rigid and stiff in a presentation is we feel threatened by the audience, or we feel like there's going to be some animosity there. But if we just come across warmer, it'll really help. That was a good question.
Well, thank you. I'm with you there, too. I like that process. I never thought to do it right before I went on stage. I usually do it sort of in the presentation mode, but by the time I'm on stage, I feel the beatings of the tribal drums, and I'm, so I should calm myself down with that.
You should do both. You put it in the presentation and before you go on stage, be thinking about them.
That's good. Clearly a right brain universe over there. Talk to me a little bit about what goes on the scenes and the sort of creative process over in your shop.
Yeah, we have a really good time. The first thing that happens is we try to collect the content. We try to do what I was just saying. We take a walk in their shoes, and a lot of times we have these subject matter experts who are sitting on this buried diamond, and sometimes just some stuff needs to be chiseled away and removed, or some fairy dust sprinkled here and there. So we'll actually help rewrite and craft a great story. People don't naturally create their presentations in a story framework, and so we'll come in and overlay story, and then we actually will thumbnail real storyboards like they do in Hollywood. We hand render them and color them and everything and present storyboards, and then we do digital keyframes and show them what the storyboard will look digitally once they've approved it. And then we go into production and produce the whole thing, and then figure out how it needs to be delivered. Because presentations go way beyond just the moment they're presented now. They can go online. They could turn into a social media object. they just go everywhere. And so we don't look at it like just that moment, because you put a lot of energy. If you did it right, you did. But presentations can become much bigger than just that moment alone. So we have a good time over here.
I can imagine. It's funny when you talked about going lots of different ways. I mean, I was thinking about Al Gore and how his PowerPoint deck became a movie, became a movement, and it's just that's obviously sort of one of the most popular moments of that ever happening. But I mean, in social media, for example, I'll put a blog post up about a slide deck I used and whatnot. And of course, you miss all the voice, you miss all the other stuff. But if I shoot only a video, then you only get that sort of me wandering around talking head style.
Yeah.
And it's not always the right storytelling elements. So it's interesting. I mean, that has to be part of it, to your point of getting the story out there and all that. Dividing that from the medium is obviously very important, I guess.
Yeah. And you have to do a little bit different things. If you're going to put your content out on SlideShare, you do have to if it ever travels without a presenter, it's not a presentation, it's some sort of a document. So the SlideShares that are very popular are the ones that are like little children's books almost. They just have words and small pictures, but they're something about that click, click, involving and having to feed like a little Pavlov's dog the next click. Each delivery mechanism has to be modified to be effective.
Agreed. I never take that extra step either, and I don't think I will in my lifetime, just because I'm just sharing the document at that point. Yeah. We were going to talk a little bit about some recipes, and one of them was how to create a presentation with a heartbeat. And I think this is such a vital tool for people because, a lot of times we're just blurting out all our information. And if we feel like if we covered everything, then we've done it well. Not if we've covered everything but maintained some kind of a pace and all that. So can you walk through a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah, so often when we start to create a presentation, we not only use an analytical creative process, if you can even call something analytical a creative process, but it's usually analytical information that we're trying to convey. And there's something about putting story in there that gives it this like heartbeat and a pulse to it. And the thing that's interesting about story is you actually physically can react to story. Your heart can race, your eyes actually physically dilate. You can say, oh, I felt a chill. We feel a story, and it's not very often we feel a presentation at all, if ever. And I wanted to try to figure out the gap between why it is we fall asleep during a story or during a presentation, but we don't fall asleep during a conversation, or we don't fall asleep while someone's telling a story usually. And after a long bout of research, a couple years, that's when I came to the conclusion with Resonate. I studied story and cinema, and then I also studied a lot of the greatest speeches of all time, and then of course had the jillion presentations we've done on our here at the shop, and I uncovered this shape, this heartbeat that the greatest communicators over time had used, but had never really been revealed before. And the big thing about story is it creates tension and then releases it. And then there's tension and a release of tension. And there's a structural device you could use in a presentation that does that same thing. And what that is it's contrasting what currently is juxtaposed to what could be. And if you keep saying, here's what is, but here's what could be, and here's what is, and here's what could be, what happens is what is becomes seemingly undesirable or even possibly painful compared with how completely alluring and beautiful and blissful what could be. And so you just have to keep that sense of tension and rhythm throughout the presentation as a structural device, and it creates a form of story. So that's how you could put a heartbeat into your next gig.
Interesting. So, I mean, could you see that working in like product demos? I guess if you were talking from the point of view of the, the benefits, not the features, I guess, if this is, end user would get this sort of a thing.
I love that question. Someone just asked me the same thing last week. Look at how Steve Jobs does a demo. I mean, my goodness, he calls Starbucks and asks for 4,000 lattes or whatever. Every single little thing that he does, he calls his VP of marketing in the audience. They have a planned conversation. Oh my gosh, I have a voicemail. Oh, it's from Al Gore. Oh my God, I'm going to listen to my voicemail. Like, all of that is planned. It's not like happenstance. And so there is a way to create interest in story, even in a demo, and keep that heartbeat going.
Wow. So it's another thing for us all to pay attention to is keeping the telltale heart ticking.
Yeah.
For our next recipe, tell me a little bit about a star moment and explain to everyone how they can create one.
Yeah, I love these. A star moment. A star is an acronym for something they'll always remember. And every presentation should have one at some point. It doesn't have to be this big dramatic moment. It could be a picture, a photo, a video. It could be a story, but it could also be a dramatization. I don't know if you saw the TED talk that Bill Gates gave on malaria. He's talking to all these old white men about malaria, and he talks about how they've spent more money on baldness drugs than had been spent on the cure for malaria. And then he releases mosquitoes into this room with all these bald white men, And he said, I just don't think it's fair that only the poor should experience malaria. Well, of course they weren't, disease-bearing mosquitoes, but it was a point that he tried to make, and that is something they'll always remember. Jamie Oliver at TED spilled sugar cubes on the stage out of a wheelbarrow to show how much sugar is in the milk, the chocolate milk that kids are eating in their lunches. So there's just different ways to do star moments. Mr. Jobs did a star moment in his iPhone launch, since I was just talking about that, where he kept the phone off. So he was just showing the hardware. He was like, see, this little hole does this, this does that. It was slides of the phone. He wasn't even showing the real phone. And he created a star moment. He built up to it. And he created a star moment when he turned the phone on. Nobody had ever seen scrolling before. So when he turned it on, it was like this big gasp. You can hear it in the videos, like, because they'd never seen it before. And so everything was planned. And you talk about a demo, that was all planned. I mean, he could have just turned the hardware on and cranked up the software, but he didn't. He went through all the hardware through slides. They didn't even see the physical phone until he turned it on, because he knew that was the moment, and he built up to that. And so it's important that we do that.
So, I mean, showmanship does matter, and storytelling does matter, obviously. And I think that when you bring this all to bear on an audience, of course you want them to remember. I'm forever getting asked this question about, well, this doesn't apply to business because, that's very serious. I'm always stunned by that, because I've never met a human that's in the business to business world that doesn't also want to be entertained.
Right, we're human. I think that's what's so sad, is we pretend that we're so different on the weekends, and then we show up at work and we have to be this, completely different person. B2B is interesting to me because many, many times in a B2B situation, your slides and your presentation is the last thing that they experience to make the sale. And so that last experience needs to be even more human, because you're not necessarily sending them to the site to see a funny video or have an interesting brand experience. You are, as a salesperson, as a B2B salesperson, you are the final experience, and your slides and your presentation can either make them feel more attached to you or make them feel more detached from you. And you want to make sure that it's engaging and memorable, because if you don't, what if your competitors did, right?
Right.
And that just sucks for you.
It's, in enduring several dozen B2B, maybe several hundred B2B presentations in my old life in telecom, I always felt like there was some kind of a competition on how many possible words can we fit on a slide into a grid that would give the least simplified methodology for explaining a point. And I think that was always that sense of having to prove that they really knew what they were talking about, and the only way they could do that is if they had 700 words on a slide.
I think that goes, like, researchers are that way, engineers are that way, financial people, the more analytical, they want lots of dense information to show that they're smart. And sometimes you do need to show a little more information to show that you did your homework. But most of the time when you're presenting, you don't need a document. You're supposed to be showing the meaning in your research and the findings in your research. And those don't take these dense statistical slides to do that.
For some reason, I went right to Switch, Chip and Dan Heath, and the whole difference between what we were just talking about with the idea of Jamie Oliver tipping over all that sugar on the stage versus this big slide that takes a real lot of time to explain that says, I really know what I'm talking about. And I think you're right. I think that's the hardest thing, is to boil it down to that one pivot point that says, here's really where it all comes down. I mean, to me, with iPod back in the day, it was 1,000 songs. Everyone in the universe had said, it's this many gigabytes or megabytes or whatever.
1,000 songs in your pocket. Yeah.
We all got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and attaching it to a human, how the humans use it. And that's a lot about what could be. Instead what we do is we talk about what is, the speeds, the feeds, the features, and it's like the what could be is how it's going to impact humankind. It's the why. And that's where the story and the attachment is how it's going to impact humanity.
And sometimes it's a translation problem. And so our last recipe was the whole idea of slides and something around how to tell people a little bit better about what they could consider doing with slides. And it's amazing how many people are quoting your advice to me, back to me about slideology and Guy Kawasaki's advice and all that. So I'd love to get some points from you about slides.
Yeah.
And that.
I have a guest speaker to talk about slides. One of my slideology facilitators, Kristen. Let me turn it so you can see her. There she is.
Hey, Kristen.
Hello. Nice to see everyone. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
How's it going?
We're making our way through, and we're still alive and well. So,
which is always a good thing.
That's right. So you were going to talk a little bit about slides and what people should know about slides.
Yeah, so I have an easy way to remember these 5 points because this is a 35 millimeter slide from back in the day. Maybe some of you recognize this. And we're going to talk about SLIDE with the acronym SLIDE, S-L-I-D-E. So the first point is the S, which is simplify. So when we talk about simplifying, what we're really talking about is using one idea per slide, which is not a lot of people do that because they're trying to cram in as many bullet points as possible. But we don't really need to do that. We're not reading a novel. We're trying to use our slides as a visual. And also, when you simplify, think about using white space because that's a really important thing. Slides are free. You don't have to cram tons of stuff on there. So some white space, some room to breathe for your audience, and you just don't have a huge, busy slide. So that's 1 point with the S. And then also L, lose the cliches. So your competitors are probably just using what their first idea was. Well, let's lose that first idea and start thinking through different ways to maybe use images or different metaphors that you might use. Think about your second, third, fourth, fifth idea and just keep pushing the boundaries with how you're displaying your information. And then the third,
I turned on my heater.
I turned on Nancy's heater. We're crammed in here. Okay. The third point would be the I, which is talking about your information. So your information needs emphasis. So what that's talking about is you have a lot of data. You have a lot of information. Great. But what we need to do is make sure, and Nancy mentioned this earlier, highlight what's important in your data. So what does your data really mean? Tell us the story behind your data and really help the audience along to see what your data points mean. So get to the point and highlight what's important. Then the D, designate elements purposefully. So what this is talking about is how are you putting all those various elements that you have? Maybe you have pictures, maybe you do have a couple of captions or some text. How are you arranging it on the slide so that it's easy for your audience to digest? So you need to think about that. And actually, designers, what they do is they designate things. They know where on the slide things need to be for your eye to flow naturally and for it to feel comfortable for your audience. So you need to think about where you're putting all of your arrangements of your items and lose all that visual clutter of just throwing things haphazardly on the slide. Actually put them there with a purpose. And the last one is the E, empathy for your audience. So please follow the Duarte golden rule, which is never deliver a presentation that you wouldn't want to sit through yourself. So we got to think about our audience first. Why are we doing this presentation? And make sure it's a good one that you would want to sit through too. So that's it. Slide. Keep it in mind.
You did that wonderfully. I felt educated and informed and yet entertained. So.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much for your time. Welcome back, Nancy.
Thank you.
Any yellow highlighter you want to throw underneath that little slide experience?
No, I think she did a good job.
Perfect. Perfect job. Empathy is a vital one. I once ever started to sit into a presentation where the first thing they said after announcing who they were was, this is going to be really tricky and difficult, and it's going to be uncomfortable at points. And I thought, it's okay if a doctor with a glove is trying to tell me that, but it's not okay for a presenter to tell me that. So.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, sometimes it is uncomfortable. But if you did it right, they should be a little bit anesthetized. If you have empathy for them, you should be able to deliver hard things and be digestible to them because you have credibility and empathy. But sometimes there's hard things to deliver. But yeah, you shouldn't act like a proctologist or something about it, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So we have moved towards 5 things everyone should stop doing tomorrow. And I had asked you for this specifically because I thought that for as many great pieces of advice as you give, I am going to see every cliche that you mentioned. I am going to see people leaning over a desk shaking hands, usually a black guy and an Asian woman.
Globe, yeah.
Globes.
Correct audience, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure you have probably 105 that you wish people would stop every day, but I only asked for 5. So, what kind of things do you want people to stop doing?
I want people to stop thinking so much about themselves. I think this goes back to being Yoda. Can we spend some time thinking about others and how they might need to process information that's different than us? That's one under stop. Another one is stop being boring. Can we be interesting? Can we be funny? Can we mix it up a little? Can we cut to video? Can we bring someone else up? Can we do fun things? Can you wear Yoda ears? I mean, we had a webinar and somehow like Darth Vader came up, and the next time he came to the webinar, he wore a Darth Vader outfit. So there's ways to keep it completely interesting. The other thing is stop pretending that you're not a human. And that'll actually help you with the boring situation too. And I think that people feel like I can't come to work and tell a story, but it's stories that endear us. I will follow a leader with a great story of a failure or a victory before I will follow someone who pretends they've never failed before. And the thing about telling stories and being really human is that it usually means that we've gone through something really tough or needed to get past a roadblock, and some people don't feel comfortable being that transparent. But we should be, because that's what will endear people to follow us. 4 is stop winging it. Because you got a plan. It takes some energy to do it right. And it makes audiences sick when it looks like you winged it, because they just gave you an hour of their life and you chose to wing it, and they chose to fly 5 hours to come and see you wing it. Not good.
I've been slapped a bunch of times, for that. So it's funny because in my mind, the idea was that I was such a great improv and that I had such command of my domain knowledge that it, as much as I was saying, hey, I'm winging it, that I was giving such great info. And to your point, no, they're rather insulted. And so
I've never winged it, but Guy Kawasaki asked that we wing it up at Ad Tech, and I was like freaked out. I mean, I wasn't completely a freak, but he just wanted us to stand up and critique slides, and it actually turned out pretty good, but we at least had a structure. Like, we knew we were going to talk about slides, so there was a prop there that we got to kind of pelt with how ugly it was and stupid it was, and so it turned out to be pretty funny. But man, that was like hard for me to do that.
I can't. You and I presenting on the same stage would be an implosion of some kind, I'm sure. But I would try to learn and give you some frames that
we'd have awesome chemistry, Chris.
Clearly. And your number 5. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Number 5 is stop before the time is up. Always try to. If they give you an hour, stop at 40. If they give you 30 minutes, stop at 20. Leave time for Q&A, because that's a way to build relationship. It's a way to create a bond and a way to get answers to questions that the audience might have, and if they don't get the answers, they might not join you around your idea or what you're trying to sell. So it's important that you leave enough time for human connection.
Exactly so. So, and speaking about that, we will cut ourselves a little short, because what comes after this video will be some question and answer, sort of in a live experience in Twitter. We'll talk about that, offline and in the information that people were sent to receive this, because that way we could keep it fresh. Behind you, just for the blind, first person to tweet this, you saw this book, that you saw this presentation, wins a book. So at Nancy Duarte. We also had a call to action. We had an idea for something that we could give away, and you actually went out and talked to your publisher. So why don't you talk a little bit about what they can have?
Yes, I'm excited about this. In my contract, it said I could give 10% of my book away at one time, and I've never done this on either book. So for Chris Brogan's viewers, for the first time ever, we're giving away 10% of both books, which is about 30 spreads of Slideology, 30 spreads of Resonate. And all you got to do is go to duarte.com/Brogan. And it's up there. Just put your email address in, and it unlocks the 10% of the book for both books. So you can grab them down as PDFs.
Look at that. Easy cheesy. And thank you for making that available. That was a really cool offer. And I had no idea. I mean, for all I knew, we'd make a goofy PDF of something that was just seemed like a nice thing to give, but
A glorious picture of me in my Yoda ears, that would have worked too.
that's right. Well, I'm hoping people did a lot of screen capture right at that moment. It was worth it for me. So this was good, and I very much appreciate your time. And people can come to duarte.com, duarte.com, which they should be able to see below this right now, to see a little bit more. And we're going to move on to our questions and answers. Nancy, thank you so much for your time and for bringing so much to this.
Mwah. Thanks, Chris. It was a blast.